Have the women's mid-card titles been a success after 1 year? We answer that next. 1 year ago, Doktor O'Kay discussed whether adding the women's United States title was okay or not okay, and he concluded that it was theoretically okay, saying that we of course need more women's matches, but he also stated that WWE needs to change. So will the title make the woman, or will the woman make the title? But theory has become reality, so let's decide whether the first year of the women's United States and Intercontinental titles have been a good idea. Doktor O'Kay loves stats, so he gave a bunch of them in that video last year, but since he's a jabroni, I can't trust him, so I started from scratch to compare the last 2 years of WWE TV to see if anything has changed and to see if the women are actually in a better place now than they were a year ago. So let's start with the basics, as our key date here is November 15th, 2024, as that was the start of the Women's United States Tournament, and that officially started the era of the women's mid-card titles on the main roster. So I compared a full year from November 17th, 2023 on SmackDown all the way through November 11th, 2024 on Raw as the last full year with no mid-card titles, to the most recent year of that November 15th, 2024 on SmackDown through this past Monday, November 10th, 2025 on Raw. Now the prior year had 115 televised shows, which included 13 PLEs and 102 Raws and SmackDowns. Now you would say there are 52 weeks in the year, but there was no new content the week of Christmas at the end of 2023. This past year saw an increase to 123 televised shows, as we had a 2-night SummerSlam for the first time, and also we've added in a whole bunch of Saturday nights main events. That gave us 19 signature events, since Saturday night's main events were not specifically PLEs, as the first several of them were on NBC as well as Peacock. And of course, we also got the full complement here of 104 Raws plus SmackDowns. For simplicity's sake, we're just going to call the prior year 2024, even though it began in the middle of November of 2023, and this most recent year we'll call 2025, even though it began in the middle of November of 2024. So 2024 had 582 total televised matches, while 2025 had 588 televised matches. And we got just 6 more matches this year, despite having 8 additional full shows. I guess that just really goes to show that Triple H loves his smaller cards. In addition, we also had some wonkiness with runtimes this year in our shows, as Raw dropped from 3 hours to 2 hours on October 7th, 2024 for its finales on USA Network, and now it has a flexible runtime, starting with the move to Netflix on January 6, 2025. Now, I will say this often seems to be about 2.5 hours, so that's just kind of weird for runtime purposes for us. SmackDown switched from Fox to the USA Network on September 13th, 2024, but it remained at 2 hours on both shows for most of this time, except for 6 full months of 3-hour SmackDowns on USA from January 3rd through June 27th, 2025. Since then, it has reverted to 2 hours, and in addition, the signature events, well, Saturday night's main event also is only a 2-hour show instead of the 3+ hours for your standard PLEs, but hopefully we've now officially settled into this routine and nothing changes in the upcoming year. But all of that is just incidental to the crux of the matter today, as we need to figure out how these new titles have affected the women's roster. So let's talk about the matches first. It doesn't matter the size of the match for our purposes, as singles matches are all matches where one person is fighting for himself or herself. That includes triple threat matches, all the way to fatal 4-way or fatal 5-way matches. It includes the Elimination Chamber. It includes the Money in the Bank ladder match. And yes, it even includes the Royal Rumble. Tag team matches, on the other hand, are all matches where you're fighting with at least one partner. That includes 2 versus 2 versus 2 tag matches, or 3 versus 3 tag matches, or let's say 6-pack tag team ladder matches, or yes, even the War Games matches are tag team matches, as those are really just large tornado tag matches, because in tornado tag matches, they are tag matches, but no tags are required. So let's get to the stats, and with all that in mind, we had 582 total matches in 2024, and 268 of them were men's singles matches, 125 of them were men's tag matches, 116 of them were women's singles matches, and 69 of them were women's tag matches, while we also have to include 4 mixed tag matches. Now you can check the percentage of matches there with the numbers that I just gave, and the most notable one for our purposes is the 19.93% of all matches were women's singles matches in 2024. When we go to 2025, there were 262 men's singles matches, 122 men's tag matches, 158 women's singles matches, 43 women's tag matches, and 3 mixed tags. Now for the women's singles matches, that jumped up to 26.87% of all matches, which is a pretty large increase, as every other match type decreased to make their way for more women's singles matches, so that does indeed feel like pretty great news in 2025. But if we remove the distinction between singles and tag matches, and also just completely remove the mixed tag matches, in 2024 we had 393 men's matches and 185 women's matches, so that's 67.99% and 32.01% respectively. Then in 2025, we had 384 men's matches and 201 women's matches for 65.64% and 34.36% respectively. That is not a gigantic leap by any means, but we are up 16 total women's matches and over 2% of total matches this year. So I have to say that's at least a good start. Let's see if that trend continues for the signature events, which includes all PLEs and Saturday night's main events this past year. But going forward, Saturday night's main event will be a PLE, as they are now Peacock exclusives. But these prior ones also aired on NBC, so they're not really PLEs. So in 2024, there were 13 signature events and 71 total matches. 37 were men's singles, 10 were men's tags, 16 were women's singles, 7 were women's tags, and 1 mixed tag, so the percentage of women's singles matches was 22.54% in 2024. Then in 2025, there were 101 total matches in the 19 signature events, with 57 men's singles matches, 10 men's tag matches, 27 women's singles matches, 6 women's tag matches, and 1 mixed tag match. So the percentage of women's singles matches was 26.73%. And while this is a much smaller sample size, obviously, an increase of over 4% here does seem to be pretty good for an increase in women's matches. But let's remove that distinction again and remove the mixed tags again. We get 47 men's matches and 23 women's matches in 2024, which is 67.14% and 32.86% respectively. Then in 2025, we've got 67 men's matches and 33 women's matches for exactly 100 matches, so yeah, that's 67 and 33% there. Well, unlike our prior numbers, this one's virtually unchanged from year to year, so that's not particularly great. And even worse is that when you consider that we had an Evolution PLE this past year that had 7 women's matches in it. But the night before Evolution, we had a Saturday night's main event with 4 men's matches and 0 women's matches. So if we just completely remove that entire weekend, we now have 90 total matches with 21 women's singles matches for 23.33% of total PLE matches. And that is also basically unchanged from 2024's 22.54% of PLE matches. And then when we remove the distinction between singles and tag matches, we have 63 men's matches and 26 women's matches, which is 70.79% and 29.21% respectively. And so that is actually over 3.5% worse than in 2024, and that is definitely not what we're looking to see here. So let's talk more about these mid-card titles specifically, as the Women's United States title tournament started on November 15th, 2024, and ended when Chelsea Green beat Michin on Saturday night's main event on December 14th, 2024. As for the Women's Intercontinental title tournament, it started on December 2nd, 2024, and ended on January 13th, 2025 on the second Raw on Netflix, and Lyra Valkyria defeated Doktor O'Kay on that show. So including both of these inaugural championship matches, we've had 10 Women's United States title matches and 14 Women's Intercontinental title matches. Of these 24 title matches, only 2 Women's US title matches were on signature events, and both were on Saturday night's main event, but for the Women's Intercontinental title, 5 of them were on different PLEs, including at Money in the Bank and at SummerSlam. So is 7 combined title matches across 19 signature events good? Well, it's hard to say unless we actually compare it to something, so let's compare it to the men, who had 16 total Intercontinental title matches in 2025, and 7 of them were on signature events, and then the US title had an astounding 22 title matches in 2025, and 6 of them were on signature events. Now yes, I know what you're thinking, we currently have US Open title challenges going on, and yeah, we've had that for 10 straight weeks, so that does really bolster the numbers here, though none of those have been on PLEs. But even if we remove these 10 open challenges, that still leaves 12 title matches for the Men's United States title, which is still more than the Women's United States title. Regardless, counting the open challenges or not, both the men's mid-card titles have had more signature matches and more total title matches in the last year. So let's move on and talk about the rosters, and we'll include any person as a main roster superstar who has at least one match in that 1 year period, including those who are full-time and part-time wrestlers, and yes, including the legends like Trish Stratus and Goldberg. And we'll also include those who are generally non-wrestlers, such as Pat McAfee, and we will also include those wrestlers who were released at some point during that year, as long as they had that one match. Perhaps most notably, this list does not include the NXT superstars, so for our purposes here, Lash Legend just appeared on last week's SmackDown and then was immediately added to the main roster, but she does not count, despite having 4 main roster matches in 2024 and 3 in 2025, as she was an NXT superstar for all of those matches. Just like the NXT superstars, we're not counting the TNA superstars or the AAA superstars either. Now we'll also repeat that you have to have one match in that year to count, and the best example of that is Nikki Cross, as she had exactly one mixed tag team match in September of 2024 with the Wyatt Six, so she did count for 2024. But somehow she has 0 matches in 2025, despite showing up a whole lot and even getting physical, so no, she does not count for 2025. With all that said, we had 89 qualifying men and 40 qualifying women in 2024, and broken down, that is 68.99% of men and 31.01% women, respectively. And in 2025, we had less men with just 81, but we had one more woman with 41, so the percentages are 66.39% and 33.61%, respectively. That is a very slight evening out of total numbers for the rosters, but it also shows that the percentage of matches aligns very well with the percentage of superstars, as both years show a 1% or less difference in the percentage of matches compared to the percentage of the roster size. So if the WWE continues to even up the numbers a little bit more, perhaps the number of matches will continue to trend in that direction as well. Now anecdotally, no, I don't have numbers here, but it sure seems like the WWE is doing a better job of using the women's roster than they are of the men's roster on TV. So if you exclude the injured and pregnant superstars, we really only have Natalya and Ivy Now on Raw who haven't been appearing at least somewhat consistently on Raw over the last several months, and I have to say that everyone on SmackDown is at least getting some time, and that includes even Michin and BFAB, who are at least showing up backstage, and yeah, BFAB's gonna get a match against your new champion, Jade Cargill, tonight. But for the men, it seems that they have a very hard time of finding any time at all for several superstars, particularly in the tag team division, and particularly on Raw, including the War Raiders, The New Day and Grayson Waller, American Made, LWO, and the Alpha Academy. And yes, that absence of Otis is quite painful for me, so let's get the big guy back here. But anyways, it is less pronounced on SmackDown, but the tag division has also started to really fall apart since their very, very great run during the 3-hour SmackDown period from January that stayed hot all the way through their match at SummerSlam. But on the SmackDown side, we also have not seen very much of Randy Orton recently, so let's get him back on the screen soon, but I have to say I'm not too worried about that. However, the status of Santos Escobar remains up in the air, even though there were reports that he re-signed after his contract expired. He is still listed in the alumni section on WWE.com. But again, let's get back to the point and ask the question, what have these mid-card women's titles done? Well, if they haven't provided more PLE opportunities, they certainly have helped provide more title matches to the women's division up and down the card, which if nothing else provides more opportunity to really pay attention to that superstar in a big match. In 2024, of the 40 qualifying women with at least one televised match, only one of them was released without receiving a title match, which was Xia Li. Of the remaining 39, 10 of them did not get a title shot at all, while 2 more of them only received a single title shot, which was through the Battle Royal for the women's world title that Becky won following Rhea Ripley's injury. And I'd say that one hardly counts, as you didn't really see them that much. They were only in there for a couple minutes and, got tossed out pretty much without, getting their due. So if we exclude those 2, which were Natalya and Maxine Dupree, 27 of the 39 women got title chances, which is 69.23% of the women's roster, but if you include them, that does improve to 74.36%. But in 2025, we unfortunately had 7 women who were released without a title shot, but of the 34 that remain, 29 out of 34 received at least one title match, which is a much improved 85.29%. And of the 5 of them that didn't, Zoe Stark and Kiana James were mostly injured during that period, so we can certainly see them not getting a title shot. Piper Niven also recently got injured, and she probably would have at least gotten a tag team title shot. Instead, Chelsea Green had to take her place, filling in with her Secret Service member Alba Fire as well. Of course, they lost, but that's not the point here. AJ Lee also just came back for 1 match so far, and I think if she sticks around, it would certainly be an upset if she did not receive a title match pretty soon. And that leaves only BFAB as being available for the whole year without receiving a title shot, and I've got to say that's actually kind of surprising since she and Michin seem to be an eyelash away from receiving a tag team title chance, as well as, I'm kind of surprised she didn't get a US title shot as well, considering all the chances that Michin got. And I suppose there's also an outside chance that there could be shenanigans tonight, and just maybe she'll receive a future opportunity at Jade's title based on that. But nah, I doubt it. Of course, the somewhat hidden downside in these stats and what I just talked about were that there were many more releases in 2025 than in 2024, as there were only 3 of them in 2024, with Xia Li, Tegan Nox, and Indy Hartwell. But we had a whopping 12 releases in 2025 if you include Carmella, who didn't have a match since early 2023, Scarlett, who was around quite often but never had a match, and Shotzi, who only was on NXT since her return, but she had been around the main roster for quite some time, so I would consider her a main roster talent. But on the positive side, even after seeing a strong rookie class of Stephanie Valkyr, Julia, and Roxanne Perez all have titles in 2025, and now adding Lash Legend to the mix last week, NXT still has so much women's talent that it would be difficult not to see them continue to even the playing field on the main roster very soon. But on the negative side, it seems that there are very few legitimate contenders for the 4 women's singles titles except for the women's world title on Raw. The WWE women's title finally gets a breath of fresh air with Jade Cargill as the champion, as Tiffy's time grew awfully stale over the last several months, but we kept only throwing Jade and Nia at her, so we can't really blame Tiffy for that. Now Jade should at least get the chance to face Alexa Bliss and Charlotte Flair for the titles now that they have dropped the women's tag team titles, so I think we could see a good end to the rotation here, and of course it'll be even better if Bianca Belair returns soon as well. For the women's US title, Chelsea's first reign seemed to be stuck with just Michin as a contender until Zelina came along, who then mostly dealt with the bumbling of Chelsea and the Secret Harvest until Julia finally took it, and of course she then only fought Zelina and Michin over a length of 4 months until they circled right back around to Chelsea's second title reign that she just got last week, which, by the way, Chelsea was on a 15-match losing streak on the main roster until winning back that US title, so I simply have no idea how she was a legitimate contender at that point. For the women's Intercontinental title, Lyra did a great job facing a bunch of contenders with that title until her 3-month feud with Becky Lynch. That Becky ultimately won, but Becky has now just been putzing around with Maxine Dupree for months, and they actually lose that title on Monday due to some crooked refereeing and or the return of AJ Lee. But to sum it up, it's been a bit of a bumpy ride in the first year of the women's US and IC titles, but it also has given some baby steps in the right direction as well, with those slight increases in overall matches. And we also need to continue to build the women's division so that there are more challengers to go with all of these titles on a more consistent basis, and I am bullish that this talent in NXT and already on the main roster will certainly be able to do just that. And if we can remove the massive releases that we saw in 2025 and get more to a 60-40 split instead of 66-34 split in both matches and roster size, I think that will be a very good step in the right direction in 2026. An easy fix for me would be evening out the number of PLEs with a women's mid-card title on it as compared to those men's mid-card titles. And perhaps this is especially needed when someone not named Becky is holding one of those titles to help increase the exposure that those wrestlers would get, as someone like Julia, who has great talent, really could have benefited from getting a few PLE matches. And while I couldn't calculate main events here, I still think there's a lot of work to be done to have more TV and especially PLEs be main evented by the women. And I really think WWE has that top talent to pull it off. And I also think they should make Evolution an annual event, or at least every other year. So in conclusion, while these titles have shown some lack of depth in the women's division, the benefits of adding them far exceed not having those titles. So when there's something to fight for that's eminently attainable, like these mid-card titles, it helps everyone raise their game. So I certainly look forward to seeing more improvement in the quality of the mid-card in the next year. I guess if I were that jabroni Doktor O'Kay, I would give these titles just a single okay for their first year, but it certainly would be way more than okay if you go right on over here and check out this week's Stop the 10 Count, including my reviews of both Chelsea's and Cena's mid-card title victories. So until next time, I am the SportsZu, and this is a podcast that needs a new name.